Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the IRCGN, the Central Ballistics Lab of the French Gendarmerie, taking a look at some of the cool prototype guns that they have in their reference collection, like this MAS model of 1925 pistol. And this dates from basically the earliest period of French post-World War I rearmament. So in 1921, the French military put out essentially a platform to replace all of French military small arms. They recognized that basically everything that had been used in World War I had become obsolete by this point. The Lebel and the Berthier needed to be replaced by ideally a self-loading rifle. The French army had this melange of pistols of all sorts dating back to 1870s period revolvers and this mishmash of Spanish semi-autos. They wanted to replace those with one standardized new pistol. They needed a new light machine gun. They needed a new heavy, they needed everything replaced. So, 1921, they set up a program to do this. Now, ultimately, the only gun that would really be effectively built in a timely manner as a result was the Model 24/29 light machine gun, which, incidentally, turned out to be a really good light machine gun and modern and kind of ahead of its time for when it was developed. Well, pistols, they did manage to make new pistols, but it would take almost 15 years to do it. So, in the years right after this program was announced, a bunch of manufacturers started setting up designs that they wanted to present to the French army, and the Saint-Étienne Arsenal, or MAS, was one of these. They came up with a bunch of interesting prototype stuff. In 1923, they came up with a gas-operated pistol that's bizarre. I would love to find an actual example someday to show you guys. 1924, they had a rotating barrel pistol, and in 1925, they came up with a simple blowback pistol. Now, this was a period where they were still experimenting with both 9mm Parabellum and 7.65 French, which essentially is a further growth of the US 30 Pedersen cartridge from the Pedersen device. This particular gun is in 7.65, but a lot of these pistols were made in both calibers, as there hadn't really been a final decision at this point on which caliber the French army wanted to go with. So this gun is presented to the French army at Versailles in October of 1925 for trials. I'm sorry, not this gun, the model 1925, very similar to this. They put something like 1,900 rounds through it. It actually broke. The breech block is a separate piece from the slide, and the pin connecting the two of them together broke. However, other than that, it seemed pretty effective. Now, the military at the time didn't really like the idea of a simple blowback pistol, but they liked how simple this was. So they asked MAS to redesign it and improve it. They had a number of things that they wanted to fix. They wanted the frame to become attached to the barrel. They wanted an interrupted thread connection between the bolt face and the slide assembly. And a lot of those elements were built into this, which essentially is MAS's response to the 1925 trials. So let's take a closer look at it. This is definitely a somewhat unusual looking pistol. The grip is frankly as long or possibly a bit longer than the barrel is. We have a big exposed hammer. It is single action only, and some magnificently large markings on it. So MAS model of 1925 M number 2. So the M, I believe, designates that this is the improved version of the original MAS 25. This was manufactured clearly after that first trial because it incorporates several of the specific design changes that the trials requested. On the other side here, we have a nice big 7.65 L. Since there were both 9mm and 7.65 caliber pistols, in these trials, it's useful to have a nice big obvious marking to tell you which ammo goes in which gun. And this is a simple blowback pistol, so it does lock open on an empty magazine. And one of the cool elements is, in fact, that magazine, which has a built-in round counter. So if you look here on the back of the frame, we have markings for 0, 5, and 10 rounds. It is a 10-round capacity magazine. And if I take the magazine out, we now have a round counter that bumps to 10. And as I put the magazine in, that round counter drops. So what's going on here is that there is an indicator bar on the inside here that is being pushed by the follower button here on the side of the magazine. So the farther down this button goes, the higher the capacity. When nothing's touching it at all, it comes all the way open to a full 10 rounds, as if this button were all the way down here. And then as that button goes up, which I can demonstrate by putting the magazine in, as that button gets pushed up, the magazine capacity indicator drops. It's a pretty cool feature. Now let's point out the safety here before we disassemble this. This is in firing mode. If I push this across, it's just essentially a cross-bolt safety that prevents the hammer from reaching deep enough to actually hit the firing pin. So when it's on safe like this, the hammer just hits the safety bar. If I push the safety over, the hammer now can go a little bit deeper to actually hit the firing pin. So there's the safe position. There it is, dropped all the way down to hit the firing pin. In order to disassemble it, we are going to lock the slide open, and then we have a little button here. This slides forward right in front of the rear sight, and then I can rotate the breech block 90 degrees and pull it out. So I mentioned that the original version of the 1925 had a pinned connection. It was construction like this, but with a cross pin that held this piece, which by the way is the bolt face, held this piece into the slide itself, and that pin broke in the trials shooting. So the trials committee requested an interrupted thread as a stronger connection, and that's what they got here. Now we can release the slide stop, we can pull the slide off. We have a recoil spring that sits up here inside the frame and normally around the barrel. The barrel is now fixed to the frame, which is another request directly from the 1925 trials results. This is our slide release and manual slide lock. Like, there's actually a lot of modern features on this pistol, which you wouldn't necessarily expect because of its somewhat awkward appearance. Take the magazine out, and then here's a cool feature. We can just fold this whole thing open like so. So this is your magazine capacity indicator. So as the magazine follower button slides up, it pushes this indicator back, which reduces the number of rounds that are shown in the magazine. Interestingly, the original commission, the gun had a 10-round magazine. After the original trials, they requested a 12 or 15-round magazine, which the French didn't appear, the MAS didn't actually do. But then in the later trials, which we'll talk about in a moment, they complained that the grip was too bulky with only a 10-round magazine. So you can see some of what the design engineering team had to go through here on the trials side. Opening up the frame like this also gives us a really good view of the lockwork. It's just a very basic single-action lockwork. When I pull the trigger back, it's going to pivot this sear forward, like so, which releases, there we go, releases the hammer to go forward. So this is held together just by a pivot pin down at the base of the grip. The mainspring for the hammer is inside here, held in place by the lanyard loop at the bottom. And then just a quick look at the breech block here. This has basically all of the important bits, moving bits in the slide contained within it. So the firing pin is in there, the safety is on there, the rear sight is here, and the extractor is right there. And a slot right here for the ejector, which is fixed on the frame right there. There you are. There is the updated, improved MAS model of 1925 semi-auto pistol field stripped. It's a remarkably modern system, despite looking kind of remarkably archaic. French arms development in the interwar period was slow. It was hampered by very repeated changes in government, changes in political policy, military policy. The guys at the arsenals were doing their best, but there was just a ton of friction in this process. And it wouldn't be until 1933 that the next really significant pistol trial took place. And by that time, there were, I believe, 24 separate guns entered in trials, including 6 different pistols, all from MAS. And they were all basically this gun with some minor variations. So the second iteration of the Model 1925 basically is the Model 1932. Now, this wouldn't have been one of the guns that was actually presented in the 1933 trials, but it was essentially the same design. So at those trials, they put 1,000 rounds through every pistol. They did 10 rounds to find muzzle velocity. They did 40 rounds in a series of 10-round accuracy trials, and then they used the remaining 950 rounds as an endurance test on every pistol that went through. And the ultimate decision of this extensive set of trials was none of these pistols are good enough for us to actually adopt. However, 2 of the MAS pistols, which again are basically this one, made it into the top 5 from the trial. So this was followed by one more trial in 1935 that had 4 contestants. It had Browning, it had a copy of the 1911 presented by Starr out of Spain, it had a pistol from SACM designed by Charles Petter, and it had essentially the outgrowth of this guy. It had what would become the Model 1935S, which was eventually, through a roundabout route, adopted. We can talk about the actual 1935S in a later video entirely on that subject, but that's where this gun actually went. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I'd like to give a big thanks to the IRCGN, the Gendarmerie, for giving me access to a one-of-a-kind prototype like this to show to you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.